From the sweltering jungles of the Pacific to the deserts of Africa and the frozen Eastern Front, it was a plane that was always in the fight from 1940 to 1945, becoming one of the most vital and one of the most exported aircraft of the Lend-Lease program. That's the Douglas A-20 Havoc, an unsung workhorse of World War II. It's called the Havoc. The British Royal Air Force called it the Boston. And the German Luftwaffe, well, they just knew it as poison. But no matter where it flew or what name it went by, it was always the same thing, a sleek, fast, powerful, and utterly deadly twin-engine package. The A-20 saw action on every major front, but it was on the Eastern Front where it truly shone. Soviet pilots loved the aircraft, affectionately calling it the Boston Ski. It was rugged, easy to fly fast on the deck, and packed a heavy punch, a perfect fit for the Red Army's ground attack doctrine. Countless Soviet pilots earned the title Hero of the Soviet Union at the controls of an A-20. As global tensions mounted in the late 1930s, major powers recognized that air warfare would become a decisive factor in the looming conflict, a reality that would soon see it emerge as a major component of World War II, consuming a substantial portion of every nation's industrial output. While the fundamental approach to air power varied dramatically between the Axis and Allied nations, the development of the Douglas A-20 Havoc emerged directly from this urgent military need, arriving at a critical juncture when the Allies required a truly versatile attack aircraft. Germany and Japan focused on air forces closely integrated with land and naval operations, downplaying strategic bombing capabilities. In contrast, Britain and the United States emphasized strategic bombing and tactical battlefield control, investing heavily in adequate air defenses. This fundamental difference in air warfare philosophy became evident as the conflict intensified. When Germany attacked Poland in 1939, President Roosevelt declared a national emergency, prompting an immediate acceleration in American aircraft production. The Royal Air Force, anticipating the German threat, had already embarked on an ambitious expansion program, growing from just 42 squadrons with 800 aircraft in 1934 to 157 squadrons with 3,700 aircraft by 1939. The Battle of Britain in 1940 further demonstrated the critical importance of air power, as Britain withstood the Luftwaffe's relentless attacks. The United States traded destroyers for air and naval base rights at strategic positions worldwide, strengthening Allied capabilities. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union would soon face devastating losses after Operation Barbarossa began in June 1941, with a staggering 9,173 aircraft destroyed by year's end. And then the A-20 appeared, heavily improved by Soviet engineers to be more accurate, more effective, and more deadly. This would help change the course of the war on the Eastern Front. The origins of the Douglas A-20 Havoc trace back to 1936, when a design team led by Donald Douglas, Jack Northrop, and Ed Heinemann developed a proposal for a bomber reconnaissance aircraft. This initial concept, designated Model 7A, was powered by twin 450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R985 Wasp Junior engines, and was estimated to reach 250 miles per hour with a 680-pound bomb load. However, combat reports from the Spanish Civil War indicated this design would be seriously underpowered, leading to its cancellation. Initially underpowered, the design evolved in 1937 when the United States Army Air Corps issued new specifications for an attack aircraft. Heinemann's team responded with the Model 7B featuring 1,100 horsepower, Pratt & Whitney R1830 S3C3G twin Wasp engines and capable of carrying up to 2,000 pounds of bombs. The wingspan increased by 6 feet to 61 feet compared to the Model 7A. The prototype first flew on October 26, 1938, immediately attracting attention. It featured a high-wing tricycle landing gear, an innovation at the time, and an interchangeable nose section that could be configured either for bombing or attack missions. Although a crash in January 1939 killed the pilot and injured a French observer, France remained impressed enough to order 100 production aircraft in February 1939, followed by 170 more in October. The United States Army Air Corps likewise recognized the aircraft's potential, ordering 186 planes powered by Wright R-2600 twin Cyclone engines in June 1939. These aircraft were given the designations A-20 and A-20A. The A-20s had one 700 HP turbo-supercharged R-2600-7 engines, and the A-20As had 1,600 horsepower supercharged R-2600-3 or 11 engines. These American variants featured a larger vertical tail to handle the increased power of the Wright engines, a longer nose providing more room for the bombardier navigator, and carried additional fuel. Several key factors distinguished the A-20 from its contemporaries. Adaptability. The design proved extraordinarily versatile, successfully fulfilling roles from bombing and ground attack to reconnaissance and night fighting. Performance. With a top speed exceeding 300 miles per hour, the aircraft could outrun many contemporary fighters. Production efficiency. Douglas redesigned its Santa Monica plant, creating a mechanized production line over a mile long that fit into a 700-foot building, reducing man-hours by 50% for some operations while tripling production. Unlike competitors such as the Junkers Ju-88 or the Heinkel He-111, the A-20 featured an innovative tricycle landing gear and superior maneuverability. Furthermore, its design allowed for straightforward field modifications, enabling frontline units to adapt the aircraft to specific mission requirements. By the time production ended in September 1944, Douglas and Boeing had produced 7,478 A-20 Havocs, affirming their status as one of the most successful and adaptable attack aircraft of the war. In the aftermath of Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, the Red Army Air Forces faced catastrophic destruction. Within the first week of Operation Barbarossa, an estimated 4,000 Soviet aircraft were destroyed. By the end of 1941, this number had grown to a staggering 9,173 aircraft lost, a devastating blow that crippled Soviet air power. The Soviet Union's surviving air arsenal consisted primarily of obsolete aircraft, Polikarpov Y-16 and I-153 biplane fighters, along with Tupolev SB bombers. While these aircraft had performed adequately in the Spanish Civil War and at Khalkhin Gol in the late 1930s, they were now thoroughly outclassed by newer German designs. This technological gap, coupled with the apocalyptic losses sustained in 1941, created an urgent need for modern replacement aircraft. Accordingly, Soviet military leaders turned to their new allies under the Lend-Lease program. In August 1941, a Soviet delegation rushed to Washington, seeking advanced bombers like the Boeing B-17 and consolidated B-24. Although the Americans declined to provide these sophisticated aircraft, they offered something that would prove equally valuable: the Douglas A-20 Havoc light bomber. Despite initial disappointment, the Soviets quickly realized the A-20's potential. Soviet military officials placed the A-20 at the top of their priority list for aircraft acquisition. This aircraft would subsequently become the most numerous foreign aircraft in the Soviet bomber inventory, with Soviet forces ultimately operating more A-20s than even the United States Army Air Forces itself. Initially, the first delivery route for the A-20 Havoc was through the dangerous northern passage to Murmansk, Russia. When the Soviet Union entered the war, the British immediately sent 277 Boston British designation for A-20 bombers from one of their orders to this Arctic port. The first A-20 Havocs arrived in Soviet territory through this northern route in February 1942. However, shipping through the Arctic proved hazardous due to German attacks, prompting the development of alternative delivery routes. The Persian Corridor aircraft were flown from the United States to South America, across Africa, and on to Abadan, Iran, with 869 A-20s delivered this way. Additionally, another 550 A-20s were sent to Iran by ship. At Abadan, nearly 5,000 bomber and fighter planes were assembled before Soviet pilots flew them to the front. The Alaska-Siberia route, opened on September 29, 1942, became the most efficient delivery method. American pilots flew the aircraft to Fairbanks, Alaska, where they were handed over to specially selected Soviet pilots organized into 5 ferry regiments. Each regiment handled a specific segment of the journey across Siberia, eventually delivering the aircraft to Krasnoyarsk for distribution westward. Through this route alone, 1,369 A-20s made their way to Soviet territory. Despite the primitive conditions and sub-zero temperatures along these routes, losses remained surprisingly low. Of 8,058 aircraft delivered from United States factories via the Alaska-Siberia route, only 174 were lost during transit. By the end of the war, Soviet forces had received a total of 3,414 A-20 Havoc bombers through these combined delivery routes. Upon receiving the Douglas A-20 Havoc bombers, Soviet engineers immediately began extensive modifications to adapt these aircraft for their specific combat requirements. The Soviet Naval Air Force recognized the versatility of the A-20 platform and transformed these American-built aircraft into specialized weapon systems optimized for the Eastern Front's unique challenges. The most significant modifications focused on enhancing the A-20's offensive capabilities. Soviet engineers installed special external bomb racks that could accommodate not only their native FAB 100 kilogram, 200 kilogram, and 500 kilogram bombs, but also the massive FAB 2,200-pound bombs. This adaptation significantly expanded the aircraft's destructive potential against ground targets. Moreover, the Soviet Naval Air Force made the A-20 Havoc a formidable naval strike platform by installing specialized external racks for torpedo delivery. While the modified A-20s could theoretically carry 2 airborne torpedoes externally, Soviet pilots primarily opted to carry just 1 torpedo to maximize operational range. This torpedo capability became a critical element in the Soviet Navy's arsenal by early 1943. When a systematic program converted the Soviet Naval Force's Bostons into dedicated torpedo bombers. The A-20G variants, nicknamed Zhuchoks by Soviet crews, were primarily selected for torpedo bombing modifications. Their self-sealing fuel tanks and heavier armor made them ideal candidates for the dangerous low-altitude approaches required for torpedo attacks. Engineers often installed additional fuel tanks in the bomb bay to increase range specifically for these maritime strike missions. For Soviet bomber crews, navigation accuracy was paramount. Hence, when they received A-20G models featuring solid noses housing 650 caliber machine guns, Soviet engineers frequently replaced these with clear nose compartments to accommodate a dedicated navigator. This modification retained only the 2 lower machine guns while prioritizing navigational precision over forward firepower. The Soviets were notably dissatisfied with the original American 30 caliber Browning machine guns, which could fire 600 rounds per minute. They replaced these with their faster-firing 7.62 mm Sheikh AS machine guns, capable of up to 1,800 rounds per minute, tripling the rate of fire. Similarly, Soviet A-20s often received the native UTK turret with a 12.7 mm machine gun in the dorsal position. Further specializing the A-20 platform, Soviet engineers modified these aircraft to drop air-delivered sea mines. This capability allowed the A-20s to conduct covert night operations, laying mines outside enemy harbors and in strategic shipping channels. Simultaneously, the Soviets converted numerous A-20B models into reconnaissance platforms. Since the B variants lacked self-sealing fuel tanks and armor plating, they could fly higher and faster than other versions, making them ideal for reconnaissance duties. These aircraft were fitted with various Soviet-built aerial camera installations for both day and night photography. As with the torpedo bombers, engineers installed additional fuel tanks in the bomb bays to extend their range for deep reconnaissance missions. A select few A-20s were further modified for the night intruder role, receiving a gun pack under the bomb bay with twin 20 mm and twin 12.7 mm machine guns. The downward firing angle of these weapons could be adjusted, enabling the aircraft to strafe ground targets while maintaining level flight. Some were even equipped to carry unguided rockets under their wings, further enhancing their ground attack capabilities. Across 3 critical naval theaters, Soviet A-20 Havocs demonstrated their combat effectiveness through specialized operations that substantially disrupted Axis naval capabilities. Throughout the war, these aircraft executed over 200 attacks against major Axis warships and merchant vessels, sinking more than 40 ships and damaging 15 others. By spring 1943, A-20 aircraft progressively replaced IL-4 bombers in the Black Sea Fleet, where they operated primarily against Axis shipping and naval bases. After Soviet forces were pushed back to the Caucasus ports, A-20 equipped units, including the 36th Mine Torpedo Aviation Regiment, the 13th Guards Mine Torpedo Aviation Regiment, and the 5th Guards Mine Torpedo Aviation Regiment, conducted intensive bombing raids on key Crimean ports such as Kerch, Feodosia, and Sevastopol. On April 18, 1944, 4 A-20Gs from the 36th Mine Torpedo Aviation Regiment attacked the Romanian vessel Alba Iulia, blasting a large hole in its hull and killing approximately 500 Soviet POWs on board. 4 days later, 12 A-20Gs from the 13th Guards Dive Bomber Aviation Regiment scored direct hits on the tanker Osag, ultimately causing it to sink. The Black Sea campaign culminated in a massive air raid on August 20, 1944, when 14 A-20G bombers joined 62 PE-2 bombers and IT-80 IL-2 and Yak-9 fighters in striking Constanta Harbor. This devastating attack sank 3 German U-boats, 8 S-boats, 1 R-boat, 3 Romanian mini-submarines, 1 MTB, and a tanker, effectively ending Axis naval presence in the Black Sea. Beginning in spring 1943, the Northern Fleet incorporated A-20s into the 9th 118th Reconnaissance Regiment and later the 36th. These units targeted Axis shipping along Finnish and Norwegian coasts while supporting naval infantry operations. During Operation RV-4 in May 1944, 5 A-20 torpedo bombers with fighter escort sank the German escort ship V-6113. Between May 13th and 14th, Soviet aircraft flew 217 sorties against a single convoy, with A-20s contributing significantly to the damage inflicted. Later, during the Petsamo-Kirkenes operation in October 1944, A-20s sank multiple vessels, including the repair ship Sudmir minesweeper R-301 and patrol vessel V-6111. These operations helped dislodge German forces from northern Russia, Finland, and Norway. By October 26th, the Baltic Fleet's A-20s, operating with the 1st Guards Mine Torpedo Aviation Regiment, 51st Mine Torpedo Aviation Regiment, and 15th Independent Reconnaissance Aviation Regiment, targeted vital infrastructure alongside shipping. In June 1944, these units conducted 24 sorties against the strategic Sphere 3 hydroelectric dam, destroying it with multiple 1,000-kilogram bombs fitted with time delay fuses. Afterward, Baltic A-20s returned to maritime strikes. In July 1944, they participated in sinking the German flagship Niobe in Kotka Harbor with 2,000 kilograms of bombs despite losing 2 A-20Gs. As Germany collapsed in 1945, Baltic A-20s intensified their attacks. On May 4th, the 51st MTAP sank the SS Orion with 150 casualties afterward, forcing the German battleship Schlesien aground while evading a torpedo. The following day, A-20s, armed with 1,000 kilograms of bombs, rendered the Schlesien a total loss. Soviet pilots who flew the Douglas A-20 Havoc consistently praised its exceptional characteristics, often expressing surprise at the aircraft's capabilities compared to their native designs. These first-hand accounts reveal why the A-20 became such a valued asset on the Eastern Front. Combat pilots frequently highlighted the A-20's stability during low-altitude missions. Captain Nikolai Koklov of the 36th MTAP remarked, "The Havoc remained steady even at treetop level, allowing precise bomb delivery that would be impossible in our PE-2s. This stability proved crucial for maritime strike missions, where several feet of altitude difference determined success or failure. Many aircrews appreciated the aircraft's responsive controls and exceptional visibility. You could see where you were going, noted Lieutenant Ivan Petrov, comparing the A-20's cockpit layout favorably to the cramped confines of Soviet equivalents. The A-20 Havoc's twin 1,700 horsepower, Wright R-2600 engines delivered substantially greater performance than comparable Soviet designs. With a maximum speed exceeding 340 mph, the A-20 could outrun many enemy fighters, a crucial advantage lacking in slower Soviet bombers. Veteran pilot Major Sergei Kostelev, who flew both the PA-2 and A-20, stated plainly, "The American plane gave us something precious, the chance to return home." Indeed, Soviet crews universally preferred the A-20 over their native aircraft when assigned high-risk missions against heavily defended targets. Perhaps most impressive were accounts of the A-20's survivability. Lieutenant Colonel Dmitry Kalinin described returning from a Baltic mission with half the tail shot away and one engine dead, yet landing safely. Such reports became common with ground crews developing field repair techniques specifically for damaged Havocs. Maintenance officers noted the aircraft's logical design facilitated rapid repairs. Engineer Captain Mikhail Orlov observed, "Unlike our aircraft, the Americans designed this plane to be fixed quickly, even in primitive conditions." This resilience undoubtedly contributed to the A-20's remarkable operational record throughout the war. Throughout the final phases of World War II, the A-20 Havoc demonstrated its strategic importance across multiple fronts, solidifying its reputation as a decisive weapon in the Soviet arsenal. These aircraft proved their worth beyond earlier campaigns, becoming instrumental in the major offensive operations that ultimately defeated Nazi Germany. As Soviet forces launched Operation Bagration in June 1944, A-20 bombers played a vital role in this massive offensive. Specialized night bomber regiments, equipped with the A-20G variant, struck German rear areas, disrupting supply lines and destroying ammunition depots. Their speed allowed them to evade enemy interceptors while delivering precision strikes against railway junctions. By early 1945, A-20s operated within 60 miles of Berlin, targeting German fortifications along the Oder River. These missions required exceptional precision, with pilots utilizing the aircraft's maneuverability to navigate increasingly dense anti-aircraft defenses. Throughout the final push toward Berlin, A-20 units maintained an operational readiness rate exceeding 85%, remarkable considering the harsh conditions and supply challenges. One of the most celebrated A-20 operations occurred in July 1944, when Baltic Fleet A-20Gs attacked the German flagship Niobe, anchored in Kotka Harbor. Despite losing 2 aircraft, the formation scored 2 direct hits, with 1,000 kilograms of bombs sending the vessel to the bottom. This victory eliminated a significant anti-aircraft platform that had been protecting German shipping lanes. In May 1945, as German forces attempted evacuation across the Baltic, A-20 torpedo bombers from the 51st MTAP sank the SS Orion with over 150 casualties. Shortly thereafter, they forced the German battleship Schlesien aground before destroying it with 1,000 kilograms of bombs the following day. After Germany's surrender, numerous A-20 Havocs remained in Soviet service, primarily with naval aviation units. The aircraft's reliability and parts commonality made it valuable even as newer models became available. Several regiments transitioned to the improved A-26 Invader, essentially an enlarged and more capable evolution of the A-20 design. Soviet A-20s continued serving until the early 1950s, with many airframes ultimately providing spare parts to keep others flying. The aircraft's legacy endured through Soviet aviation design, with several features influencing post-war Soviet light bomber development. In addition to shining on the Eastern Front, in the hands of Soviet pilots, the A-20 Havoc also wrote epic stories on other fronts. France became the first nation to field the DB-7, with early deliveries beginning in late 1938. These aircraft were assembled and shipped to Casablanca for deployment. By May 1940, approximately 70 DB-7s had been delivered to France, with French forces flying around 70 sorties during the Battle of France. Initially, France had ordered 270 DB-7s. yet only 116 were accepted before the armistice. Following France's defeat, surviving aircraft were evacuated to North Africa, falling under Vichy government control. These units eventually rejoined Allied operations after Operation Torch in 1942. Notably, some French DB-7s briefly engaged Allied forces during this North African campaign. Subsequently, Free French Squadron 120 Lorraine, operating under Royal Air Force control, was re-equipped with Boston 3As and later Boston 4s, participating in numerous raids against targets in mainland Europe. After France's fall, unsold DB-7s were transferred to the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force employed these aircraft extensively throughout Europe and North Africa. In Britain, 24 squadrons operated the Boston primarily as night fighters and intruders beginning in early 1941. A unique British adaptation was the turbine light, which replaced the nose searchlight to enable Hawker Hurricane fighters to target enemy aircraft at night. Despite their innovative nature, turbine light units were disbanded in 1943 due to radar-equipped aircraft becoming more effective. In total, 181 Boston aircraft were converted to Havoc WWII configuration. The United States Army Air Forces first deployed the A-20 in North Africa in late 1942 during the North African Campaign. On July 4, 1942, crews from the 15th Bombardment Squadron became the first 8th Air Force members to enter combat flying Bostons, belonging to No. 2 26th Squadron Royal Air Force against enemy airfields in the Netherlands. The A-20's Pacific combat debut came dramatically on September 12, 1942. When 9 modified A-20s from the 8th Bomb Squadron roared over the treetops at Buna, catching Japanese forces completely by surprise. On July 12, 1942, Japanese troops landed at Buna on the Leh Peninsula's north shore and began marching southeast over the difficult Owen Stanley Mountains toward Port Moresby via the Kokoda Track. On September 9th, Japanese troops took Ioribaiwa, a settlement immediately north of Port Moresby, and the Allies began preparations to defend the city itself. During the first 2 weeks of September 1942, the situation in the Pacific War remained uncertain, but everything was about to shift abruptly and dramatically. On the morning of September 12th, a formation of 9 modified A-20s from the 8th Bomb Squadron roared over the treetops, introducing the Japanese at Buna to a new type of warfare. Each plane had 40 of General Kenny's fragmentation bombs and 6 50-caliber machine guns in the nose. The 9 A-20C, headed by Captain Don Hall in Kentucky Red, approached at treetop height, utterly surprising the surprised Japanese. The first wave of 3 A-20s flew low over the airfield, strafing the rows of bombers parked down the runway before dropping fragmentation bombs as they went over. The Japanese first fired back, but after the first 4 planes attacked, there was full panic on the ground, and the remaining 5 bombers encountered no small arms fire. Since then, the Japanese have been conducting a defensive war. The extraordinary effectiveness of the September 12th raid prompted General Kenny to order that planes under his command be upgraded to carry para-frag bombs and launch low-altitude strafing strikes on Japanese ground forces. Within a month, Japanese supply lines from Buna had been severed, and the air forces at Buna and Lai were rendered ineffectual. The Japanese forces, which had reached within a few miles of Port Moresby, began retreating up the difficult Kokoda Track toward Buna. General Hori, the Japanese commander, was among those tossed off the Kamusi River Bridge after it was destroyed by the bombers. Throughout 1943 and 1944, A-20G Havocs, with their solid nose configuration, became the 5th Air Force's primary weapon for pinpoint strikes against Japanese aircraft hangars and supply dumps. Flying in tight formations at wave-top level, their concentrated forward firepower could overwhelm shipboard anti-aircraft defenses with remarkable effectiveness. After playing a crucial role in World War II, the Douglas A-20 Havoc rapidly faded from military service, leaving behind a complicated legacy that deserves greater recognition in aviation history. The production of A-20 Havocs ceased in September 1944, after 7,478 aircraft had been built. As the war concluded, most air forces quickly replaced their A-20s with newer aircraft like the Douglas A-26 Invader Bristol Beaufighter or de Havilland Mosquito. Perhaps the most notable post-war operator was the Brazilian Air Force, which continued flying the A-20 until the late 1950s. Throughout this transition period, many A-20s never even returned home, instead being scrapped or abandoned at overseas bases. By the early 1960s, the A-20 Havoc faced near extinction with only 6 complete airframes known to exist worldwide. Fortunately, recent expeditions into the jungles of New Guinea and investigations of Russian crash sites have uncovered additional restorable airframes. Today, visitors can see preserved A-20s at several institutions, including Moscow's Central Air Force Museum, the National Museum of the United States Air Force, and the Papua New Guinea National Museum. Despite being the most produced attack bomber of World War II, the A-20 Havoc has been strangely neglected in historical accounts. Lacking the glamour of single-engine fighters or massive strategic bombers, it occupies an awkward middle ground in aviation literature. Furthermore, its rapid replacement by the A-26 Invader, which served through the Korean and Vietnam conflicts, pushed the A-20 further from public memory. Number 2, 26 test pilots who evaluated the aircraft noted it has no vices and is very easy to take off and land, extremely pleasant to fly and maneuver. Notably more forgiving than the B-26 Marauder, which demanded precise control during takeoffs and landings, the A-20 proved particularly friendly to novice pilots. This accessibility undoubtedly saved countless aircrew lives throughout the war, allowing pilots to focus on their mission rather than wrestling with difficult handling characteristics. Ultimately, the A-20 Havoc was a versatile, fast, and powerful attack aircraft, a true unsung hero that proved its mettle across every theater of World War II. As a crucial part of the Lend-Lease program, it was especially effective in Soviet service. And though it's often overshadowed by more celebrated planes, there's no denying its vital role and massive contribution to the ultimate Allied victory.